Sandra.
Thank you, Felice, for the opportunity to participate in this panel. In our business model, we act as a facilitator to enable the transfer of IPs from the organizations that have an excess number of IPs, so the sellers, to organizations that have needs, or the buyers. So our transfer process is kind of what I want to talk about. The first activity is the initial planning step, where an organization does network engineering planning. They define the block size that they need, they do financial planning, they do an internal business case, and they secure their internal financial approval to secure IPs. So we as a company are not usually involved in these internal steps that go on within your organization. The second step a buyer would do is go to the RIPE NCC at this time to secure the pre-approval step. And again, usually the company does this on their own, but if they come to us and say, can you help us to go through the steps with RIPE NCC to get approval, we will help you. We'll walk you through those steps in talking to RIPE NCC. The next step is market research, where the buyer would get a list of sellers, prices, and block sizes, and we can help with that. We can tell you what's available and at what price. Next, we do a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, between buyer and seller, and we help with that, and usually we're part of the NDA. The buyer would then examine the block with our extensive help, both legally and technically. We would then do an asset purchase agreement, which defines the contractual terms and conditions between the parties. We then arrange payment, which can be via escrow, solicitor agreement, letter of credit. We've seen prepayment done, post-payment done, lots of means of payment. The transfer is done with our help, using the tools provided by the RIPE NCC. The transfer memo is sent, usually accompanied by the organization documents of the two companies. And the IPs are then announced by the buyer. And the last step is the cleanup stage, where usually a bill of sale is provided, and any final steps, including the release of escrow, if escrow is part of the arrangement. So those are the kinds of services we provide in transferring IPs from seller to buyer.
Okay, thank you. And my second round of questions are in fact about the procedures, that some of the procedures that I'm really interested on, specific ones, and Sandra stepped into that a little bit. It's basically what are the mechanisms you are applying to ensure that you're talking maybe the rightful holder. If somebody comes to you as okay, I have this address space, can you connect me to somebody who would like to be transferred to themselves? What are the mechanisms or the checks you apply? And when I'm asking this, I'm also very much interested. Well, we've seen those words mentioned, raised in previous sessions today, the hijacks and the address blocks that are being maybe not so rightfully captured by certain people. Do you find yourself or consider yourselves liable in terms of this issue? Do you consider this is something that you should be looking into? And what is your liability maybe if you find out after the transfer that you facilitated that has been the issue, or there is some kind? Thank you. Sandra, very shortly.
In the RIPE region, IPv4 Market Group does three things. First, we consult the RIPE registry to look at the entry, and we request the company registration papers and compare the registration to the RIPE registration. And in the RIPE region, with all the transfers we've done here, we've not yet encountered one situation where the registered owner has not matched the company contacting us. So in other words, we have not seen any hijacked blocks. Number two, a further concern is not just the legal ownership of the block, but the quality of the block. And we look at block blacklisting to ensure the block quality has not been spammed on or emailed on. And number three, referring to my past answer, step 5 in our transfer process is the block examination by the buyer, and we support the buyer in its performance of any additional due diligence. And that would be both on the legal side and on the technical side in what they do. Lastly, when the RIPE NCC transfers the block from the seller to the buyer, RIPE requires the transfer request to be accompanied by the organization documents of both the buyer and the seller. So RIPE itself does some due diligence to make sure that the ownership is what it says it is. So there is a lot of fact checking to make sure that there is not hijacking during the sales process.
Okay, thanks again. Well, now there's another part that I want to run in regards to moving towards your relationships with the RARs and how the policies work for you and the procedures that you may want to have a change. What are the impacts of the in-place policies in the RAR regions for you, as well as the procedures? On your reflections on that, I want to take. But I also want to, inject yet another question there while you're responding that. And again, not on behalf of your own company or anything, but in general, why would the broker would like to be an RAR member if that would be an option? And is this a thing that you make a judgment on your own when you think about your activities? Sandra, very quickly. Thank you.
So we've been involved in policy development in this region for quite some time. If you'll recall, I authored 2012-02 and 2012-03 related to inter-RAR transfers. And those proposals met with some apathy in terms of not being passed yet. And we're at the point now with Tori Anderson's proposal for no needs justification, which Elise knows and loves well, that needs justification will be eliminated probably by the end of this year. And that will supersede, I believe, 2012-03, where I had proposed 24 months needs justification, so now we will have no needs justification. And I think that's a good thing, and I'd like to see all of the RIRs adopt that policy. I think it's an important step to get the LIRs to not have the burden of administration. And I think that's part of Tori's point as well, so that LIRs can just run their businesses really, and it's business demand. There's two other policies I think that would help LIRs that aren't on the books yet. The first is to allow legacy IP owners to come into the fold, and I think that's where we're going with 2012-07. So I'm a big supporter of that, and that relates to the accuracy of the registry. And the second point I'd like to make, I know we're under time pressures here, but the second point is a policy to allow PI holders to come into the fold as well. We get a lot of calls from PI holders with small spaces, and they don't want to pay the right dues, and they need to do something with that space. And you, again, using the word fallow again, you've got fallow space, usually small, sitting there that needs to be dealt with. So those are some of the things I hear about a lot, and I think that needs to be dealt with within the RIPE community.
Right, Andrea, very shortly.
Yeah, I just would like to add something as to what Sandra said. It's about the PI holders requesting transfers. We have seen also as RIPE NCC an increase in PI holders requesting the address space to be transferred, which currently is not allowed by policy. And actually this is one of the pieces of feedback that we as Registration Services Department will bring back during this RIPE meeting to the address policy work group.
Thanks. Well, now, he's been
We were founded 2.5 years ago, and our sole purpose is to trade IPv4 addresses, and I expect to be doing this for at least 10 years.
Tor.
Tor Andersson, Info. With regards to the earlier discussion about supply versus demand and the numbers on the listing sites, there is actually public data on allocations being made. And I've looked into that, and if you could say the year before we actually ran out, up until September 2013, if you take that as a baseline of the demand in the region and assume that if it has not gone down, it has stayed the same at least, and compare that to the amount of transfers being registered and published on the NCC main webpage. It seems that the amount of transfers, both when you look at the number of addresses and the number of blocks and for transfers, is somewhere between 3 and 4% of the demand. And that's not a lot, I think. So it would appear that the remaining 96% of the operators in the region are getting their V4 fix somewhere else. Is it Cisco and Juniper and the CGN providers that are doing it, or are they doing what they can to find unused space in their allocations? What are your perspectives on this? And do you think this is likely to change, or is this an indication of the market basically not being all what it was touted to be before?
There's three things that we've seen. First is some CGN. Secondly, we've seen a lot of out-of-region acquisition of IPs. And thirdly, we know there's been a lot of IP stockpiling prior to the run-out. And what we're seeing now, a year after the run-out in the RIPE region, 2 years after the run-out in APNIC, we're seeing acceleration of request.